Nice to see everybody, especially Amy and Lysley, old friends. I wish we were in the same place to celebrate these amazing, funny, beautiful novels. But you guys are fighting the good fight and getting the word out on our computers. We were all fellows. You know, historians will look back and obviously say 1999 was the greatest fellowship class ever at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. It was an amazing gift. We got a whole year to just teach one class a semester and work on our weird fiction and poems together. And it was just such a special year. I have so many happy memories of that time. Do you guys think about it? Do you still have dreams about that year in Madison?
I do remember driving, for example, we road trip down to AWP in Kansas City. And in Kansas City, we also visited the many fountains of Kansas City.
Oh, that's right.
A picture of visiting one of the many fountains of Kansas City. So.
Yeah, because I told you it's supposed to be just like Florence, Italy, right? And I was like, Amy, we got to do this tour. It's like Italy, apparently. So I do have two office memories about the two of you. So the first office memory is moving into the office. Me and Ron Kuka, I guess people weren't happy with the furniture arrangement. So me and Ron Kuka are lugging lockers and big desks on our backs. And Amy's just kind of standing back saying, yeah, I guess it looks all right. and then Tony once, I think I was having a particularly bad day. And Tony came into the office and said, writing is so much fun. And I was like, I am going to drop kick this son of a bitch.
That was youth. That's all over now. Now it's all just writer's tears.
Writer's tears, yeah. This is the other sponsor of our reading, by the way. Thank you, Books Are Magic. Thank you, Writer's Tears.
Yeah, I have writer's blood.
Which is why you're immortal and don't age. So I guess it makes sense.
Well, I'm going to make you guys just read from your books just for a little bit before we get into them. But first, I just want to say cheers and congratulations to you guys. They're both just outstanding novels. They're such good summer reads. Field Hockey, the 80s. It's just so fun, Amy. I just love the book. I'm cracking up every page. And Lysley's somehow walking this tightrope between sadness and humor on every page of his novel. So I really urge everybody, if you haven't read these books, they're just a great way to escape all the crap that's going on. And also they illuminate you and fill you with that meaning that literature can give us. So cheers to you guys.
Oh, thanks. Thanks so much, you guys. Very happy about this. It's nice to be together, even if it's just on the screen.
Yeah, totally. So Amy, do you mind going first? Do you want me to help you set up the book at all? Don't feel like you have to go more than a minute or two, but it'd be nice to give everybody a sense of the novel in your language.
Yeah. So the book is set in 1989 in the town of Danvers, which is an actual place on the North Shore of Boston. And for those of you who don't know, so Salem back in 1692 actually used to be much bigger. And there was a part of Salem that was actually called Salem Village. And Salem Village is where a lot of the events happened that spurred on the Salem witch trials. And then later on, Salem Village, like that. So right. So later on in 1752, Salem Village broke up in the town of Danvers. So basically, the book follows a girls' field hockey team in 1989. It's a rags to story. They start off the season, they're really terrible, but then maybe they turn to the darker arts to try and make it to the state championship, and that's sort of what happened. So let's see. So again, I think I'm actually not going to do the 4-minute thing. I think I will actually go a little short. Oh, nuts. All right. So the section that I'm going to read is basically they've been in Salem for Halloween. So they actually played a game against the Salem witches, and so now they're spending Halloween night in Salem itself. And so they've been to a parade, and they've met these 4 college-age guys, and so now they've driven to Gallows Hill to try and find a Halloween party. And what ends up happening is most of the team goes out to try and find the party, but one girl stays behind with one of the college-age guys, and something has just happened. And so everybody comes back, and again, now they're talking to find out what happened with the girl who stayed behind with the college-age guy. And I should say that the car that's mentioned belongs to the college-age guy. And then the last thing that I'll mention is that you'll hear a reference to Onion Town. Onion Town is just another name for Danvers. So, what happened? Asked Heather Houston. Already she was in fighting mode. Julie Min sat herself down on the ground. Apparently, this is what it meant to be an adult. There was no turning back. He thumbed my nipples, she wailed. Sue Yoon was the first to pick up her stick. In some ways, she was the one among us who we could always rely on to do the one thing we wanted to do, but were too scared to. She stood for a moment by the side of the window. The sound was actually smaller and more anticlimactic than we expected. "He did what?" shouted the claw. It was purely rhetorical. The claw was just doing its part to egg us on. "He pretended he was spelling words on my boobs," Julie Min said through her tears. "That bastard," said Heather. Quick as a chemical reaction, she shot up on her feet and smashed in one of the passenger side windows. She did it without hesitation and with such panache, we all realized still waters run deep. Then she spread her legs like a colossus upon the earth, raising her stick in the air, and brought it down with furious vengeance on the Town and Country's hood, her glasses flying off into the night. It didn't matter. She didn't need to be able to see. She had seen enough. Then we all fell to it, all of us except Julie Min, who remained seated, the sound of our fury like a hailstorm, our car radios tuned to WBCN and their Halloween headbanging ball, Motley Crue's Shout at the Devil filling the night. "Why didn't you whack him with your stick?" asked Boy Corey. "Good God, Boy Corey, way to blame the victim." Still, her answer wasn't what we were expecting. "Because I liked it," Julie Min replied in a small voice. Instantly, we all stopped what we were doing as if we were playing a game of freeze tag. "Repeat," said Boy Corey. He was wondering how he'd explained a vandalism charge on his college applications. "I said I liked it," repeated Julie Min. "I liked it a hell of a lot." "Then why are you crying?" asked Abby Putnam, lowering her stick. The moon sat uncertainly in the sky, wondering if it should shine down on Julie Min hard without abandon, or hold off a bit and give a girl some space. "I told you," Julie Min said, "because I liked it. Emilio made me like it." With that, she picked up her own stick. The moon turned on its full wattage. Julie Min stormed over to the Town and Country, a woman not scorned, and smashed in the back window. And thus, pandemonium smoothly re-ensued. At one point, one of us, maybe all of us, raised our faces to the half moon and let out a blood-curdling howl. Ah, the ladies and gent of Onion Town. May Salem never forget us. Maybe that wasn't the last car we smashed up that night. Thanks.
Hey, what? Great job, Amy. Well, we'll get to, there's so much in there. This like taste of the supernatural that's running through it, and the collective point of view is so fascinating, the way it ties all these girls' minds together. I just love how you handle that. We'll get to that. Leslie, you want to read a little bit from The Son of Good Fortune?
Yes.
About Excel and his amazing mom and his journey and Hello City and all this, the pizza place is incredible.
The Pie Who Loved Me.
The Pie Who Loved Me, a spy-themed kitty pizza place where pizza goes to die. Yeah, happy to read. Before I do, I just want to say if people enjoy our books and like what we have to read, if you purchase the book from Books Are Magic and you email me a proof of purchase, lesliet@gmail.com, I will sign a sticker book plate. And send you a fancy little bookmark my publisher provided for me. You send me a proof of purchase and your mailing address, and I'll drop a copy in the mail for you. So it's sort of like signing a book. But anyway, thanks everybody for coming, and thanks again, Books Are Magic and Amy and Tony. I'm reading from The Son of Good Fortune. Some quick background. This is the story of 19-year-old Excel, who is an undocumented Filipino young man, and his mother, Maxima. They live in Colma, California, which is a town of 17 cemeteries right outside San Francisco, where the dead outnumber the living. And Excel has been gone for 9 months to try to make his own way in the world, and he has just returned. And this is the night of his return. He's back in the apartment that he shares with his mother, Maxima. I think that's it. All right. Here we go. Excel flips on the living room light and sees Maxima everywhere. Above the couch on the wall, 2 8x10 photographs, one of Maxima in midair and mid-kick, a sword in each hand. The other photo, she's in a shimmering gold gown holding a rocket launcher. On the cinder block bookshelf, a Polaroid of Maxima knee-deep in jungle water, flanked by men in army fatigues, wielding machetes. Another photograph where she sits on an overturned Jeep, blowing a kiss to the camera, wearing a wedding gown spattered with blood. Atop the TV, on a stack of old IKEA catalogs, why does Maxima save them? She never buys furniture. Sits a gold statuette of a stick of dynamite, a star at the end of its fuse, with an engraving on its marble base that reads, Most Promising Action Heroine, Star of Tomorrow, Dynamite Star, Manila Movie Awards. He picks up the trophy, surprised by how light it is. The whole thing is plastic, the marble too, and sets it down. He goes to the kitchen. On the wall above the table is a framed movie poster of Malakas Strike Force 3, Panalo Ako, Talaga. Excel translates in his head. Strong Strike Force 3, I win, really? Something like that. The poster is an illustrated collage of the movie's big drama moment. Jeep explosions, big muscle thugs firing machine guns, and curvy ladies in tattered blouses, desperate and on the run. Maxima's role in the film was small and uncredited, an assassin disguised as a nurse, her one scene, a death scene, but she's there at the bottom of the poster, staring straight ahead, swaddled baby in one arm, and a pistol in her hand, aimed right at you.
Yeah.
There we go.
That's great, Lysley. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, I just want to get right into it. We'll talk about all kinds of crafty stuff later, but I want to just talk about, can fiction help? Can it do things? Can it exert social change on our society? I think both of you are addressing in fascinating ways young people whose voices we were not hearing a while ago. I think of Boy Corey in particular, and definitely Excel. And so I just wrote down a couple of things. Here's Saul Bellow. This is something he wrote in his letters. I wrote it in my journal years ago. He said, writers can only try to demonstrate in close detail without opinion. I wonder what you guys think about that. How you manage trying to express underrepresented voices and still just be an observer and make something beautiful. Can you make something funny and almost silly and still make something important and change the world in a sense? Maybe, Amy, do you want to start with that? What do you think?
Oh, these need to be softball questions. Softball question.
Amy will speak for the both of us. I'll drink.
Well, I thank you very much. Yeah. So I think of it in terms, I think of my book, and I'm not saying that all books would treat the topics and the subjects you're mentioning this way, but I think of my book in the way that I use humor. I think of it as a smoothie, right? As a green smoothie. So green smoothie, you've got the spinach in there, but hopefully you also have an apple, and you also have some pineapple and some blueberries, and that's what makes it palatable, right? So in thinking about that Saul Bellow quote, I mean, he's right in the sense that if you have your opinion, you know, if you wear it on your sleeve, if it's on like the page in discernible kind of ways, your reader is not going to be like, not going to want to, you know, continue with that work, right? Because they're being preached at. Like again, if you can slip it into the smoothie in certain kinds of ways. And so that's what I'm really interested in. And then I'll just say really quickly too, so I was definitely interested in rethinking the 80s. You know, oftentimes when we think about the 80s, it's just fun hair and it's all those movies and ha ha ha. But if you go back and you think about it, like there's a lot of misogyny, there's a lot of homophobia, there's a lot of racism, right? And so I knew that if I was going to write about the 80s, that I had to also look at that other stuff that a lot of those teen movies kind of forgot about. So
absolutely. I mean, girls' sports, there wasn't even the language to use to describe Boy Corey, and you demonstrate that so well. I think, you know, there's like, we were just totally unequipped as kids to address other kids like that and difference in schools.
No spoilers. Yes.
Lysley, what do you think? Do you want to mention what TNT is and what I mean, I think about I wrote down all these ways that being undocumented messed up Excel's life. He can't go to the emergency room. He doesn't really speak in class because he doesn't want to draw attention to himself. He loses this heartbreaking moment where he loses an adolescent friendship because he doesn't reveal this fundamental secret about himself when one of his friends does. And he's working these impossible hours in this demeaning job at the pizza place, on and on. Can you just address, like, are you ever stepping back from what you're writing and thinking, I want to write about what it feels like to be undocumented? Or are you just telling Excel's story, getting the Bed Bath & Beyond, you know, flyers in the neighbor's mailbox and the pizza place and the ball pit?
Right. You know, I think, you know, when I started the book, I didn't know that Excel and Maxima would be undocumented. I mean, I sort of built a story around their relationship. And I knew it had to be a very fraught, challenging one. But of course, you watch the news, and if you follow Jose Antonio Vargas, who's probably the most famous undocumented immigrant in America, who's Filipino, it's kind of hard not to think about those things. So when I decided that I would sort of, if you want to say, take on the subject, I had to keep in mind that it had to only be one aspect of Excel's life. I want to believe, I'm not an undocumented person, but I want to believe that an undocumented person, in many ways, that person's existence, of course, is informed by being undocumented, but hopefully it's informed by other things as well. Hopefully it's not the defining circumstance. So I wanted to try to get that across in the book. And like Amy said, if you're going to incorporate humor into the narrative, that can sort of help the smoothie go down, let's say. So you got your vegetables in there, make sure you get your gin in there too, right? So
wait, speaking of gin.
That's how I drink my smoothies. Is that me? That's my holiday card from, how old was I? That was like 2 years ago, right? I forgot about that. So, you just hope that it's just one aspect of Excel's story. It's very important, obviously, but it's not the defining element of his existence. And if you're going to put humor in there, and, I totally love the humor of Amy's work too. Humor, and I think this is true in Amy's book, and hopefully it's true for most humor when you're reading fiction. It's not just, you're not putting the humor in for the joke. So there might be humor in Excel's journey of being undocumented, but humor hopefully is just another aspect of the truth. That it's maybe absurd, maybe it's bizarre, but it's still organic to his existence.
Absolutely. And I think you guys undersell how funny you are by saying it's the honey or the apple juice or the gin in the smoothie. I mean, it really is, it's pointing out the absurdity of these existences, but it's also can sometimes be so sweet. I think about Z and this old man, the father figure of this guy who owns Gunter, who owns this pizza place. And every time he's on there, it's funny, but it's also really tragically sweet. And, I think that's happening all the time in Amy's book too. These girls, the whole book opens at this summer camp at UNH, and you're laughing, but it's also such a reminder of both innocence and experience and this teetering on the fulcrum. And then Amy's also taking a coming-of-age story, which is usually about individuals, and she's bringing a whole group, a whole team through coming of age. So there's also kind of this experimentalness to the humor that's really beautiful.
I would maybe turn the question on you, Tony. I'm interested because, you're fun. Like, the three of us are fellow. People probably, figured out that there were a lot of laughs. But none of your work really is particularly funny at all. And I do say, so for example, my first novel is a very serious novel about Vietnam. It is not humorous, and many people died. It's very sad, right? But this book is funny because in certain ways the subject matter asked it to be funny. Lysley, again, is a funny person. And in thinking about his stories, though, he definitely has stories that are more like bittersweet, and that kind of things. But Tony, I'm interested for you, although I don't know if this is on the table. We can ask you
Let's get it.
But I don't. Yeah, so what's your relationship to humor in your own work?
Yeah, I worry about it. I was reading this most of the day, and I'm like, gosh, Amy's just totally unshackled herself. For me, I'm always setting something in the 15th century, and it takes me a month to get the details down. And you've just got Jordache, Benetton. You've just got that stuff because it's in our memories. And I'm almost so jealous of how unshackled that feels. And so I think I'm still stuck in this trope of literature must be serious. And anytime I start having too much fun, I'm like, well, I got to modulate this with some death pronto. And I think what's beautiful about a novel, unlike a story, is that you can modulate a lot more. That you need to have big sine curves. Do you guys think about that consciously? Or are you okay, things are getting a little serious, it's time to lighten things up?
I think I did for this book. I did because I knew I'm saying that their status as being undocumented is not the defining circumstance or defining element of their lives, but it would be naive to assume that the undocumented aspect of their story would not be one of the prominently feature details in the jacket flap copy or in a review. So I knew for sure that was going to be, part of the conversation. But I think I did. There were times where I thought, I knew I was having some pretty bleak moments here. And I knew I did want to balance it with humor. But again, I just had to make sure that it wasn't as though I was like trying to incorporate a joke. I had to make sure that if there was a humorous scene, like for some reason, these characters are at Target a lot. They're always in Target, it seems like. Who isn't always at Target?
There's two Targets right next to each other there.
Yeah, the two Targets. There's a good Target and a bad Target. So, so I figure, okay, if they're at Target, there's got to be some kind of humor you can sort of excavate out of a setting like that. But again, it's got to be organic. And I think when you're thinking about humor in your work, you also need to be very mindful of maybe what the overall emotional perception of the book might be. So this book might be seen as a really sad book. So if that's going to be the case, if there's going to be humor, I need to remember to contextualize it in in this larger story of a very difficult life that these characters face.
Yeah, it's the light though that balances the shadow in a lot of ways. If you really think about it, them not being able to go to this grandfather figure's funeral, it's just so crushing. And
right.
They can't even go see him in the hospital. And so when you start carrying that weight around as a reader, you're so grateful when you get these little moments where you're laughing a paragraph later.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you guys think about pop culture? You both use it so well. I'm sure you get students who say, I didn't put any references to anything in because I want my work to be timeless. Especially, Amy, you're just conjuring this era. You're just like gushing out like an 80s mall in a way onto the page. What did you think about that? And did you just embrace it wholeheartedly?
Yeah, it's interesting because as we all know, the process of copy editing, right? So, you usually get to the book, it's copy edited and you're hoping that it's clean and it's not. It comes back and it's like all red. You're like, please, right? Mm-hmm. But this time the copy editor, she was really a fact checker. So she checked all these 80s facts. So for example, my sister, who, I just want to say really quickly, my sister made me this kilt against, I was going to wear it a lot during my book tour, which then got canceled because of COVID-19. But so anyway, I have this really killer
awesome.
If anyone's curious to know. So
awesome.
But again, she fact checked it. So there was all these things like, for example, my sister worked at a restaurant called Salad and the fact checker the copywriter couldn't find this. I'm like, this restaurant was at the mall. I know this, right? So for me, adding all that stuff, like 99% of the places mentioned are real places in Danvers. 99% of like the TV shows, the music, it's all factual, and it just gives the book just that it makes it feel authentic in a way. It is true that I was a little worried that for younger readers, for example, a friend of mine's daughter read it who's 20 years old, and one of her first questions was, "What's a parliament?" Like, they just don't know those cigarettes, right?
Oh, yeah, right.
Which is cute that for a younger reader, there's a lot of stuff, like when they're talking about race and Larry Bird and the Celtics and all this stuff, that you might not know that. But I'm hoping that there's enough other stuff there so that if you don't know the references, contextually, you can still figure it out.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. I was very proud of myself for the Frankie Goes to Hollywood reference.
But Tony, you weren't even born yet.
That's right. I'm 21, but still. Just to remind folks, in about 5 or 6 minutes, we'll take questions. We'd love to take questions from the audience on the Q&A. I wanted to talk about, just as fiction writers, how you guys maneuver two pretty complicated things, both very risky. Leslie, I wanted to start with you. You move back and forth in time. And about every 5 days, I'll get a letter from somebody who's very angry at me for how I handle time in fiction. They're like, it would have been good, but you jerked around too much in time. How did you handle past and present tense, these scenes in Hello City, which we haven't even described to folks yet, and all the events kind of leading up to Excel's departure?
Sure. So the present storyline in my novel is the return of Excel after 9 months away in this off-the-grid desert town called Hello City. And then that's the novel split between that present time and his time in Hello City, which spans about 9 months. And I'm not just saying this, Tony, but this idea of going back and forth in time, I think you run this risk of, will it seem like the Wayne's World flashback that, where it just seems so cheesy and totally, no sense of elegance or transition whatsoever. I used to be so self-conscious of that. And then I wrote a story in my first book called Save the Eye Hotel, which I wanted to take place between one night and the span of like 40 or 50 years. And I was like, how do I do that? I came across a story called The Hunter's Wife by Anthony Doerr I kind of plagiarized you in a way, I hope you don't mind, where you have a story that takes place in a single night and spans the relationship between these two characters. So I think after reading that story and sort of applying some of those principles to my short story, with the novel, when I realized, okay, these Hello City flashbacks, they can't just be these little flashbacks. It's a main narrative unto itself. I had to tell myself, establish the pattern early on in the first few chapters and trust that your reader will catch on. And even what might seem like a clunky transition of, a line like, 3 weeks later, 8 months after, you kind of, if the writing is good and it's confident and you've sort of helped the reader acclimate to how to read the story in terms of time, I think you can jump around in time as much as you want. But I think it's a matter, it sounds so almost clinical, but it's just establish the pattern, earn the reader's trust, write it well, hopefully, and hopefully, they'll catch on. But I was nervous about jumping back and forth in time, but I realized, going into this novel, I have to do it. A very important part of the story takes place in the past. So you just have to go with it.
And I think it actually is the risk pays off so well, because it's kind of fun to see somebody spin one plate, but when you start spinning multiple plates, there's more tension, and you can't kind of wait to get back to either one. And sometimes the absence of the narrative, you're like, well, what's happening in Hello City and what's going on with Sab? And I want to get back to that. Sometimes the fact that you're away from that for a while actually builds tension in the reader's mind. So
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say just really quickly that we read The Hunter's Wife in manuscript form, and
we did.
You guys helped a bunch with it. Yeah.
Was it in my apartment where we read that draft?
Probably. And that's all plagiarized from Alice Munro. People think of her as like a very traditional storyteller, but she's always fracturing time and zooming ahead 40 years in a paragraph or something. She's kind of extraordinary like that. Yeah. Amy, you take. I'm just fascinated by the collective point of view risk you take in the novel. Just so people know, can we just maybe describe what that is? And then how did you get to the courage to say, I'm just going to do multiple protagonists?
Yeah, so first person plural, again, it's been done in things like Jeffrey Eugenides, The Virgin Suicides. So it's telling a story from the point of view of a collective we, right? Tony also has a story called This Used to Be Griselda's Story, which is told from a first person plural perspective. So it's a person and number that's not used that often in fiction, but you do see it sometimes. So for me, I think I knew right from the get-go that it was going to be a first-person plural voice. I just didn't quite know who was going to tell the story. I didn't know if it was going to be the entire school collectively telling the story of this team, or at first I thought too it might be the freshman girls. There's a way in which freshman girls oftentimes are like fascinated by senior girls and know everything about them. But I realized pretty quickly in the process that like I couldn't explain why the freshman girls would have been in certain spaces and how they would have known certain things. I think for me, going back to the fact that the three of us had a writing group back when we were in Wisconsin, it was the three of us, and then Judy joined our writing group, and it was us. It's true that for me as a poet, I'm primarily trained as a poet. I have never actually taken any fiction classes. Everything I know about writing fiction is just, which we all know a lot because we all read books, we all watch TV, so we have really, sophisticated understandings of fiction. But it's true that I maybe in a good way, I don't know what you're not supposed to do, And so for me, like a first person plural, I didn't think that was going to be hard. I didn't think, it didn't occur to me there'd be problems with it because I just didn't know. And so once I figured out, my joke is that there's no I in team. You know what I mean? And so once I figured that out, then I was like, oh, that's who's telling the story, and that's just what it is. So.
And were you tempted to individuate the characters like with space breaks and titles and, like let's have the whole page turn, and now we'll be in the goalie's point of view, and now we'll be in the left forward's point of view?
No, but it did mean I knew, and it was based not on the collective voice, but it's based on the fact that in some ways there are really 11 main characters, which is kind of a lot.
Yeah.
I did know, though, that I had to work really hard to physically differentiate them. Yeah. There's a lot of character description, like somebody has crazy hair, or somebody else has a thing on their neck, a hickey, or somebody else has whatever. So I knew I had to physically make them separate in that sense.
Yeah, you do an amazing job. This is so interesting to me. There's this book opens with this like coach's diagram of the players. When did you decide to do that?
Oh, I knew from the get-go, because there's just so many people. I think I wrote it because it helped me keep everybody in mind. And at first I had it was going to be more, they're going to have like their numbers and all that kind of stuff. But I'm like, okay, it's just position and name. It's just that. So.
You play with a lot of those sports tropes. Like we all say like, here are the stats, or I love that stuff. It's kind of interesting. Is that intentional? You're kind of, even the Bad News Bears reference, which is in there, an 80s reference, maybe it's 70s reference. is kind of saying, winking to the reader. It's metafictional, almost saying like, this is the story I'm about to tell you. Is that intentional?
Yeah, I was definitely thinking in terms of, there has been the movie in the early 2000s, Bend It Like Beckham, but that women really aren't represented in sports movies. If they are, it's things like gymnastics or skating, like I, Tonya, right? And so I was very interested because when you see these sports movies, it's always like basketball, it's football, whatever. And so I'm like, what does it look like when we get a group of girls, playing a sport? How can I use that in certain kinds of ways? It is true that somebody pointed out, because Emilio Estevez is a character in the book, I've never seen the Mighty Ducks. So I think the Mighty Ducks, though, comes out in the 90s, so maybe I dodged that bullet.
I think it is the 90s.
All right. Whew.
Was he in the Mighty Ducks?
He's in and it's a sports team, like they're bad, right? It's a hockey team, I guess. So
Was Paula Abdul in it? Because Emilio Estevez used to be married to Paula Abdul.
Were they married? Or
Yeah, they were married, which is actually the most important revelation of this whole event tonight, is that they were indeed once married.
Oh.
And I think they're tuning in.
They'll be in the questions.
All right, Michael asked if we get some questions by 5:35 my time. So here we go. There's a few on here. Here's Richard. He says, Amy, at what point did you know that the book would end 30 years after the year of the champion?
Spoiler! People, there's spoilers.
Right.
Yeah, I should have.
Leslie's like, I'm out of here. Like, there's no reason to finish this book now. How did I know it would end? So it's an interesting question. I'm not somebody who ever plans anything out. Like, I never plan. I don't. Yeah, I never. I just write, and then I just, okay, then I keep writing, and then I see what happens, and I keep writing. So I did not know that until I knew that they were getting close to the end of the season, and I knew that, like, oh, I gotta go to the state championship. Oh, and I knew too that even, and it's I rarely read my own reviews, like rarely, but I did happen to see parts of a review that mentioned the fact that field hockey is almost like a second thought, that the book doesn't really revolve around field hockey. It revolves around these girls, right? And it's true, like, I just couldn't imagine having a whole chapter where it's just like the game because it's like, describing sports really isn't that interesting. She takes the stick, she rears back, she hits it, you know what I mean? So I knew that I didn't really want to see the game in that way, So again, I never planned anything out, but I would say probably maybe about 2 chapters, because I write chronologically, about 2 chapters from the end, then I figured out, why not have them go into the future and see what happens? So yeah.
That's nice. Yeah, that is another way you kind of invert the traditional sports narrative, is you don't rely on the inherent drama of the match, of the game. That's cool. Lysley, if you had to write a sports movie, what would it be about? That's great.
Figure skating?
Do well with like billiards?
I don't know. God, if I had to write, who asked that?
Let's see. That is David Stein. I don't
David,
know.
I knew it. If I had to write, if I did write a sports-themed story, I don't know who in the audience is old enough to remember. Certainly the 3 of us are not. Battle of the Network Stars. Do you remember that? Come on, Howard Cosell. If I were to write, because sometimes I watch those on YouTube and they're hilarious, and I will send the 2 of you some links later. I would probably write Battle of the Network Stars. It's so funny because Battle of the Network Stars, you see like Tom Selleck or Trapper John MD, just like, we've got to win this. CBS has to fucking win this thing, man. Oh my God. I mean, it's like the Olympics. It's just like, oh my God. If Joe from Facts of Life isn't in the tug of war, can NBC win? What's going to happen? I mean, it's high. And I remember being a kid, and I took that shit seriously. I was like, oh my God, I'm really stressed out right now, because I always rooted for ABC. I was like, oh my God, if ABC doesn't win, I don't know what's going to happen. So I would write about Battle of the Network Stars.
I love it. Great answer. You pulled that out of nowhere. Well done, Lysley. Woo!
Right now. Somebody right now is writing that screenplay.
Denise asked, maybe it's gone. It was there. It was, what is your writing superpower and what is your writing kryptonite? Amy, you want to go first?
Well, again, in our writing group that we had more than 20 years ago, I was informed that adverbs are, remember that, but Tony had a thing about adverbs. And again, because I'm a poet, I love me some just extraneous description.
You're such a buzzkill.
God, obviously.
Yeah.
She asked inquiringly.
Yeah, exactly. So it's true that as a poet,
He said drunkenly.
it's both like a strength of mine and a weakness. Is imagistic description. Like again, like Lysley was saying earlier, it has to be in the service of something. You can't just have beautiful writing just for the sake of beautiful writing. It's got to be doing something. So it's true that I rarely met a simile that I don't love. And so after I write something, I have to go through and be like, I call it the word rake. I got to take a word rake and go through and cut out all that stuff. So I guess my strength and my kryptonite are the same thing, right? Doesn't kryptonite make him strong in certain situations, but it makes him weak in others? Or
it depends on the kryptonite. There's red kryptonite, green kryptonite, gold kryptonite, white kryptonite.
Gotcha. So I'm going to say
lots
that
of kryptonite.
Kind of kryptonite that can be both a strength and a weakness.
Lysley, what about you?
For me, my writing kryptonite is writing. My writing superpower, one is that I usually pick a very good font. Garamond, thank you. Garamond.
What size? 10, 11, 12?
If it's Garamond, 12. Or no, 11.
Poetry is 11 or less.
Gentle touch. But if I have a writing superpower, I think my writing superpower, author photo. Author photo. I have sold tens and tens of copies off this.
Can I go back to Garamond for a second then? Because do you ever have, again, poets, if you mention a font to a poet, like, if you're AWP and you walk in, you're like, Garamond, and it's like, yeah, it's crazy. So
that would cause a riot at AWP.
It would, you know what I mean? So, and thinking about it though, I heard this interesting thing that sometimes you can write using a font that's too pretty, and it actually fits you out to thinking that your work is polished, right? And so it's
like if you're in the calligraphy font.
Yes.
Well, but if you use a really easy font, then you know that you have to get your writing where you want it. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's probably more true for poetry, because there is a way in which in poetry it's like you can feel like your stuff is polished if it's in a really pretty font.
Actually, but I don't write poetry, I write fiction. In drafts lately, I've been printing out in, I guess it would just be Arial, which is kind of a very plain. So I think there's something to it that with Arial, it feels like the working draft. So I'm just really paying attention to just what the hell have I just written. And my final draft might be in Garamond or maybe Times New Roman or something.
Yeah. It's an interesting question, because from my book, we went through a couple of fonts, because there were some fonts that the italicized version of them looked too fancy.
Yeah.
And I was like, it looks too fancy, we can't have that. And so it's interesting. And then there was a font that I really liked, but because I don't read it, but my editor told me that it was young adult, right? And because I don't read young adult, I don't know what the fonts are for it.
What is that font called?
I don't remember. We didn't use it. It was a font that I thought I liked.
It's called Garamond.
Yeah.
You mean it's not called Gawky Teens?
Yeah.
Katie asks, hi everyone. For all three of you, what's your favorite part of the writing process? Loved all your books. You want to start, Lysley?
Finishing. Because I don't do it very often, but when I finish, it really is that. I mean, the two of you have quite a few books under your belt. I'm a really, really slow writer. So just being able to finish something, I don't know, it's rewarding, because it takes me a long time to figure out what it is I'm doing on the page. I'm very slow.
How about you, Amy?
Yeah, I would just say that for me, finishing something is really rewarding, but I also like when you're at that stage in the process where you know what you're doing-ish. Like, for example, for me, it often has to do with structure. But once I know what the structure of something is, I'm not saying that it writes itself, but like this book, I knew it was 11 chapters. I knew each chapter was a different game and a different character. Like I had the structure of it. And so I didn't have to figure out a lot in certain kinds of ways. And so it was fun to work on it, because I had some of the big nuts and bolts things already figured out.
But Amy, is that true just for fiction? Because you write poetry, you also wrote a libretto. You write. I mean,
so hopefully my first play will maybe be produced in a couple of years.
And plays. So is it that recognition of? I mean, is it that experience of knowing when you're finished? Is it different based on the genre, or?
Maybe. I heard Tony once say somewhere in an interview the idea that you can't keep I think you were talking about how you do need to have like readers, because you can't keep an entire book in your head. Like you can't know like, oh, okay, on page 400 I said this, but so you need people to help you remember what you did on page 200. But for me, when it's true, when I write a poem, I can keep the whole poem in my head, right? And so I do feel like when it comes to poetry, the ways I tackle structure and stuff like that, I can know it in and out in a way in which I can't know a fiction book because of its length in and out.
So on your own with poetry, you can just kind of you can be your own editor.
I can.
Yeah. What about like the libretto that you wrote or the plays?
So the plays are different. This is my first time ever. I just did this whole thing where we did because of COVID-19, it was done on Zoom, but hopefully in a couple of years it will be done as production. And so I've actually just started, like, I now have a theater agent, which I have to say is nuts. I'm like, I was a poet. I used to hate listening to fiction writers talk about their agents. Because I was always like, oh, guys, get over yourself. And now I'm like, how do I end up with all these agents? But playwriting is fascinating because it's collaborative. It's collaborative in a way that you have to just walk away. You know what I mean? It's like you might have had a vision for it, but you need these people, and they're using money. They're spending money to do stuff for you. You know what I mean? And so there's a way in which you want to be there and help them figure things out, but there's also a way in which you have to walk away. So
how do you react to that collaborativeness? Because you started mostly as a poet and you just said you're your own editor, and to suddenly embark on this endeavor where it is collaborative. Yeah. What are you? How does it feel to be collaborating? Got it.
No, it's really exciting because you see things that you didn't know. The same thing happens a little bit in poetry in the sense that, like, the way that I write a poem, it very much needs the reader to interpret it, right? So it's the idea that I write something and the reader's like, oh, this poem could be about this or could be about that or whatever, right? But that's just the way in which they're doing it with the text. But the actors are doing that with your play. Like, they're seeing things in there that maybe you didn't intend, but that are to be brought out. So it's fun.
Yeah. Tony, do you still show your work to people, or are you pretty much mostly on your own until the final stages?
On my own. Yeah, it's the worst. And I get the grass is greener jealousy going for the collaborative artists, friends of mine, until COVID. But anyway, now I feel horrible for all of them. The idea that now we're in middle age, and I have friends who aren't in the arts at all who they've kind of built flywheels and their jobs kind of run themselves, even so they can like go fishing or go on a walk and their job's still happening. And for me, I'm like, there's no bricklayers working on the paragraphs when I'm going on my walk. I mean, they might be kind of in my subconscious, but as my stamina kind of diminishes and I can't pull these like 11-hour flights where I'm typing the whole time anymore, I kind of get jealous of those collaborative artists where somebody else brings all this fresh energy into the work. It's kind of fun. As for what I like best about the writing process, I love the beginning. I think I love research. I kind of got into fiction writing to learn all kinds of stuff and be a dilettante and fly into as many different subjects as I can. And before it ever gets capitalism and Zoom all over it and publishing and fonts, this idea that's just like, it could be anything. I know what Amy's saying about like, once you find your form and you start moving almost downhill, but I kind of love that beginning uphill section. Everything's possible and you don't really know the characters yet and you're learning. It's really fun. Let's see. For Amy, how do you decide what medium to tell a story? Do you know from the beginning it's going to be a poem or a book, meaning probably a novel, or a play?
I think I do know, and the only reason why I know is just because I make that decision. Like, hey, I'm going to work on a play. Here it is. So, it is all storytelling, and the question becomes: are there certain stories though for which I really have no answers, and then those ones might become more poems, because in poems I'm definitely more interested in just exploring and not having any kind of resolution or what have you. So I'm much more interested in just in investigating something than I am in the fiction or in the playwriting.
Yeah, I wanted for Quan Barry completists, I wanted to point out that there is interest in the witch trials long before. There's this amazing poem.
I know that poem.
Yeah, Tituba, is that how I say it? Her name's spelled differently all over the place, right?
Yeah, Tituba. Yeah.
Anyway,
so I feel like you guys, because Tony, you used to write. Didn't you start as a poet, like as an undergrad? Didn't you take undergrad?
Oh, no, I went to the I was terrified of
took
the
poetry.
poets. They went like they wore black and looked like elves and went to the chapel, and they were very scary. And then I submitted poems to get into the class, and I didn't get in. And so after that day, I never wrote another line break ever again because I was so crushed. I had written one. It was like, a tree is a tree is a tree. And they were like, you're not in the class.
I got a B in poetry, and that pretty much ruined it for me.
I got a B+ in playwriting, so I was like, oh.
Yeah, I hope people are listening to that. Remember, like, these incredible artists were not encouraged enough as youths. This is from Medi. Amy and Lysley, you're beautiful.
Medi!
Congratulations on tenure.
Oh, you got tenure? Hey!
I hope that's not a secret. I'm like,
whoops. Watching you now makes me miss martini o'clock out in the world because my fancy shoes are achingly lonely. But in earnest, how is the writing, breathing, being going during these strange times? Which is a really good question. How do you guys go about making art during this when you have all these demons kind of around the desk all the time? You want to start, Lysley?
Sure. I'm on sabbatical this year, or I was on sabbatical. So I had these grand plans for, just writing just tons and tons and tons of stuff. I should have expected this, but there was a lot of editing to do with this book. So I spent most of the first half of sabbatical editing. And by the time second semester rolled around, I thought, I'm done. The book's done. I'm just going to write brand new stuff. COVID hit and kind of shat on all our sabbatical plans. So it's, for me, it's been really tough. And it's been sad to release a book during the pandemic, a book that, I've been working on for X number of years. But then what's been heartening is to see writers and publishers and agents and publicists rallying to try to adapt to the times, which they have remarkably. And when I think about it, if the pandemic hadn't hit, I don't know if the three of us would be together at this moment. So there are upsides to it as well. So I've been writing here and there, but I admit that there have been moments where there are moments where you just feel like, oh my God, with all this horribleness going on, so many people suffering, why am I doing this? And I actually find myself, I advertise this reading on social media, and I begin the announcement with an apology. It's like, sorry, but if you have time, here's something to do. Because I know that there are bigger pressing things than this event. But at the same time, I'm human, and this event means a lot to me, and especially because I get to be with you guys. So it's tough. It's a weird time, but I think it's important to try to proceed with business as usual as much you can when the unusual is going on.
Yeah. And I would say too that for me, I'm very fortunate, and I live in, ivory tower in many ways. It's nuts, how privileged I am. And so for me, actually, it's the protests. The protests after the killing of George Floyd have actually been much more impactful as far as my writing process and things like that are concerned. And it's been impactful in the sense of getting me to think about what kinds of stories I want to tell, whose stories I want to tell, and in what format. And so, I have another novel that I'm thinking about. So again, I'm just in those first sort of stages of it. And at first, before George Floyd was killed, I was thinking about it in just sort of like an escapist kind of way. Basically, my idea for this book is I now call it Lord of the Flies in Antarctica. So you get a bunch of tourists who get stranded in Antarctica, and it's sort of a Lord of the Flies kind of situation. And when I was first thinking about it, I was just thinking about it just kind of like as an escapist, almost like thing like that. But then I started to think about it in terms of like social criticism, like ways in which you could get people from all over different social strata, what have you, who are stranded on this island, and it could become a social critique, and then thinking about that, that's so, like I said, a lot of things that are happening in the world is informing the way in the stories that I want to tell. So.
Yeah, that's lovely, guys. It's a lot. I mean, it's hard. Sometimes I'm just too addicted to reading the crappy news, and it's hard to have quiet all those voices to just start to create stuff. But the other day I came across Toni Morrison after George W. Bush won re-election. I mean, you guys may have seen this essay. It was like, I think it was the 150th anniversary of the nation, something like that. She wrote this essay. I'll just read it really quickly because I've found a lot of courage and hope from it. She said she was staring out of the window in an extremely dark mood, feeling helpless. A friend, a fellow artist, calls to wish me happy holidays. He asks, how are you? And instead of, oh, fine, and you, I blurt out the truth, not well. Not only am I depressed, I can't seem to work, to write. It's as though I'm paralyzed, unable to write anything more in the novel I've begun. I'm about to explain with further detail when he interrupts, shouting, no, 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 this is precisely the time when artists go to work. Not when everything is fine, but in times of dread. That's our job. She says, I felt foolish the rest of the morning, especially when I recalled the artists who had done their work in gulags, prison cells, hospital beds. And then I'll skip a little bit. She says, there is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal. And I'm like, okay, maybe my voice is dumb and ignorant, but at least we got to try. We got to keep trying to make art.
Yeah, for sure.
So important. Okay, let's get to some lighter questions. Thank you all so much for doing this. Can you tell us what you are reading now or what upcoming release you are most excited about? Amy, you want to start?
Sure. I actually brought a couple of, again, like Lysley was talking about the idea of the pandemic and how because of it, books that should have gotten their due are just not getting their due. This is a really great book called The Coyotes of Carthage.
Oh, yeah.
It's already been optioned by the same people who did House of Cards. So basically an African-American political fixer goes to the South to get involved in a referendum about mining rights. And it's fascinating because it shows you just how dark money works in our political process. And it's really harrowing in many ways. So it's by Stephen Wright. And then just another book, again, because not many more poetry in the world, more poetry. So this is a book called Imperial Liquor by Ahmad Jamal Johnson. It's basically, it's many of the poems revolve around LA, both before and after the riots. So there's kind of like a blaxploitation feel to it in certain kinds of ways, but it primarily documents Black life in around LA in the late 80s, early 90s. And I think it's just a really beautiful book. So yeah.
For me, so I'm back in California. I was quarantined in Indiana for 4 months away from all my stuff. So now that I'm back in California, I am in the midst of We Write Upon Sticks. Thankfully, I'm glad to be back to that. And then I'm looking forward to The Likely World by a writer named Melanie Conroy Goldman, which is, I've read a bit of it and it's awesome. So everyone should check that out. The Gringa by Andrew Foster Altschul, which is a wonderful book that came out in March, but I just got back to California, so now I have it. And I'm also partial to, admittedly, my partner's new book of poetry called Fruit, Bruce Snyder. I hope people check it out. It's a beautiful book about what it means to have a life without children, basically, which is sort of the life that I lead. But luckily, we have access to children. We just don't have our own.
I was going to say, Bruce has you.
Amy, do not encourage him. He is in the next room. Probably drunk.
Sorry.
Just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Oh, that's lovely. I'm just going to pimp these 2 books. Guys, if you're looking to read something, read these 2 books. They're really, really, really good readers. Good books, good for readers that are on this chat. All right, let's see. Lysley, this is from Stuart. What is the cocktail that pairs with your novel?
So you will find out if you're willing to tune in again on August 29th. Bruce Snyder, my partner, and I, he has a new book out. We are reading together at Green Apple Books, and we're going to reveal our signature cocktail. And if you zoom in, we're actually going to make the cocktail. So August 29th, Saturday, I believe. No, is that a Friday? Whatever that last Friday is in August, you will find out what to pair with the book.
Nice.
That is awesome. I love it. All right, Deborah asks, Quan, since there was a spoiler, okay, I'll try to tread lightly here. I read the book once, but not twice. It was interesting to think of the grown-up versions of the characters. I think I can say that while listening to you read the Halloween scene. Did you think about the grown-up iterations of the characters while writing or editing the earlier parts?
Again, I don't want any spoiler kind of stuff. There is one character in particular who has a journey, goes on a journey, and at the end of the book, we see various things. I was very sensitive to that particular character's journey because, again, as Tony had mentioned earlier, it's not one that we necessarily see a lot, and I wanted to make sure that I got that right. I had readers look at that and give me suggestions for ways to think about making sure that that journey felt as sensitive and as authentic as possible. So that there's one character in particular who, yes, in thinking about who they become as an adult, that I was very sensitive, like I said, to making sure that I handled their youth in the best way possible. But other than that, no, I didn't think too much about the other characters. Their adult selves did not inform. I think it's the other way around, that their teenage selves very much inform their adult selves, right? And so that's how I sort of thought of it.
There are moments even early. I remember like around page 30, somebody flashes forward in their thoughts. And like, what will we think of these moments when we're older? You're preparing the reader in a sense already. So you're clearly thinking about it.
It was interesting. So right before COVID hit, so I did a reading at Books Are Magic, and then I went back to my hometown in Massachusetts, and I actually got to go back to my high school, and it was like 100 people. It was like after school was over. I think they maybe had to be there, but anyway, there were a lot of kids there, teachers and stuff like that. And then it was probably the last thing we ever did. I gave a reading. It was March 11th at the Danvers Historical Society, and a lot of my friends from the field hockey team came, and 2 of the former coaches came, and
wow,
really great to see everybody. And the thing that's, it's funny because I got interviewed by the National Field Hockey Association newsletter. It was interesting because they were asking questions based on like student athletes, like what kind of advice would you have for student athletes? And I was like, I don't have any. But the thing is, because I was pressed on it, it made me realize that when you play sports, or if you're on newspaper, or if you do drama club or whatever, like you really do make friends who theoretically are like lifelong friends. And so these people who came to my reading, I just emailed them today about setting up a Zoom conversation. You know what I mean? So these are people that I've known since, forever. And yet because of the bond through sports, like we're all still friends.
That's beautiful. Really quickly, I wanted to ask you about the coach a long time ago, and I kept forgetting. Do you mind talking about the parallels between your real life coach and fictional coach?
So that's her right there. Her name was Barb Damon. She was a legendary coach. So she's on the end there. Legendary coach. She's in the Hall of Fame in the North Shore Conference. So she actually, thinking about that last question, she passed away before the book came out. So she passed away the spring before, so last spring. And because of it, because she had passed away, it meant that I could actually pump her up and make her even more herself, because generally speaking, legally, you can't actually, I was told, you can't actually have characters who are based on people unless they're like famous people, like Bill Clinton or something like that, right? So because she had passed away, it meant that I could go back in and give her even more characteristics of Barb. It's one of those things, we mentioned it really quickly in the book, the idea that as teen girls, we didn't appreciate like her love and like what we meant to her. And that is a regret that I have, that a lot of my friends who live in Danvers still kept in touch with her and still saw her, but it's true that I didn't. But my understanding was that she knew like everything that was going on with all of her girls, and she'd had teams for like 30 plus years. So.
Yeah, the book takes on special poignancy for me as a father of teens right now, because those mentors, with online school, it's like what adults will be in their lives and how do those connections look on this? It's like the boys are going to be in their rooms hours in a day, and I'm worried about them. I'm worried about all of America's youth right now at all these different stages in their lives when you don't have direct contact with adults who aren't your parents.